George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
The Russians have been cut off from Pornhub, CNN, and Facebook. And Deborah Meaden off the Dragon's Den is trying to force McDonald's and Coca-Cola to pull out of Russia too. At this rate, the Russians will be the healthiest, most well-adjusted people in the entire continent of Europe, although they're no longer in Europe, according to Google Maps. Just like that, Russia is Asianized, othered, as people are being sacked from their jobs all over the world for refusing to denounce their own country. I've taken little Orlov and little, I've forgotten his name. They don't have blue eyes, but they're welcome as refugees in my house. I can tell you, over the next 3 hours, we'll be diving deep into some very murky waters indeed. You've heard the rest. Oh boy, have you heard the rest. But you haven't heard the best. And that is the mother of all talk shows. More than 1 million people, well over 1 million people, were our audience last week. And then we had a Moats Extra on Thursday, which is also climbing towards the million. So the appetite, the audience for a different point of view, well, it's kind of a human thing, isn't it? Who wants only to hear one side of the story? So you can vote, you can call, you can tweet, you can even email the show. Fasten your seatbelts, because this is rock and roll radio with the pictures. Except there's no radio. It's now only pictures. But that means we can count you all the more easily. Settle down. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
This tea is not Yorkshire tea. I don't want anybody organizing a pylon. This is Red Bush from glorious South Africa. Amandla, the best tea in the world, but it's quite a nice cup. I've had to abandon most of what I was going to say to you in these first few minutes because of two very dramatic developments in the Russian-Ukraine story. The first of those is as yet unverified, but consists of revelations from the Russian Ministry of Defense that documents and other evidence have been found very close to the Russian border of a full-scale biological weapons laboratory that was manufacturing and stockpiling weapons of mass destruction in the Ukraine. If ever there was evidence that the Ukrainian people and their country are being used and abused by NATO, which is really the United States, the Dutch army doesn't concern anyone very much. Neither the Italian nor the Norwegian. These are all lipstick on the pig of American domination. The Ukraine has been used and abused by American politicians, particularly in the Democratic Party's top elite. The Biden family, the Kerry family have their fingers, not just their fingers in the till, they're in the till up to the elbows. They're family members working in Ukraine's oil and gas sector, hoping to achieve a bonanza if they can develop the extensive oil and gas assets which lie in the seas around the peninsula. That peninsula is what this war is really about. That and oil and gas. Russia has cut off the main pipeline taking Russian gas to Germany. 40% of Germany's supply is now non-existent. Germans will have to choose between heating and eating. And if they choose heating, their gas prices, having already tripled, will triple again. In fact, the ripples of the sanctions taken by the European Union at the demand of the United States are going to devastate the European economy. Russia, meanwhile, has adjusted as it said it would, selling all the gas that it would have sold to Europe directly to China, selling all of the wheat that it would otherwise have sold to Europe to China and Pakistan and others. As to its commodities, vital in manufacturing in the western part of Europe, you can forget about those. That commodity shortage will start to see shelves emptying and factories closing down. This entire imbroglio is about the United States' intention to contain and confront the Russian Federation. All the rest is just kabuki theater. But the revelation that biological weapons were being stockpiled and being manufactured on the Russian border puts this entire story in a very different light. For younger viewers, and to my dismay, it turns out there are some who know nothing about the US-UK invasion and occupation of Iraq. I must point out to all of you that the existence of a biological weapons program, you'll remember Colin Powell at the UN with his little vial filled with what turned out to be washing up liquid. How appropriate was that? The entire basis of the invasion and occupation of Iraq, which killed 1 million people and which sent ISIS and Al-Qaeda cascading around the globe, starting earthquakes that have not finished and will not finish in the lifetime of most of the people watching this show this evening. The weapons of mass destruction hoax was a lie. It was entirely a manufactured lie, as anyone of a certain age or anyone with an inquiring brain already knows. If it turns out that it was not Iraq that was manufacturing and stockpiling biological weapons, but the United States of America and on Russia's border, then everything will change forever. Not just a flagrant breach of international law, not just a breach of every chemical and biological weapons convention signed by the United States and Ukraine, but a casus belli that no sane person in the world would dispute. If a country hostile to you is manufacturing and amassing an arsenal of biological weapons just across your border, no country in the world would fail to make every precaution necessary to neutralize that deadly threat. Do you know what was in the biological weapons laboratory? Anthrax, the plague, cholera, yellow fever, the whole 9 yards of deadly biological weapons. There can be no conceivable excuse, no hiding place from these revelations. And if they turn out to be, as the Ministry of Defense promises that they will, then the United States will never be able to show its face vis-a-vis Syria or anywhere else on this deadly, mortally deadly subject of biological weapons. The other new development is that in the last couple of hours, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, of the United States of America, has said that the US will green light, that means they possess the green light, any NATO country that wishes to fly warplanes from their territory to Ukraine for use by the Ukrainian armed forces. The problem is that there are no airfields left usable in Ukraine. All military airfields have been destroyed. The entire military infrastructure of Ukraine has been destroyed. That means that any such jets would have to be flown presumably by Ukrainian pilots from air bases in neighboring NATO countries. The Russian government has said that any such development would mean that the country involved would be treated as a direct participant in the conflict and would be attacked. So to these bird brains, many of them experts on COVID just a couple of weeks ago, who are now expert in geopolitics and military strategy, calling for a no-fly zone to be imposed by NATO over Ukrainian airspace, must understand this, that Russia will not just seek to shoot these NATO aircraft out of the sky, but furthermore, the military bases in NATO countries from which these warplanes flew will be a legitimate target and will be destroyed. And then we will have a European war, an open Russia-NATO war, because Article 5 of the NATO Charter treats any attack on any NATO country as an attack upon all of them. That means we'll be at war between Russia and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And that war may very well quickly become a nuclear war. You thought that this was just a dark cloud, a fearful dark cloud, until Blinken's statement today. But now it is bathed in sunlight, in its obvious peril for all of us. So those of you who were ready to pay £2 a gallon for your petrol, ready for your tripled gas prices to triple again, may have to now recalibrate. That not only will your economy be destroyed in a European war, it may very well be that all of us will be destroyed in a nuclear war. Nothing could be more serious than this. Blinken's statement could not be a more serious escalation than this. The Biden administration, having used and abused the people of Ukraine for the last 8 years, may very well have guaranteed the end of Ukraine as a sovereign independent country, and maybe the end of many a country in the region and beyond. Some people say to me I should be trying to stop the war in Ukraine. I've been trying to stop the war in Ukraine every single day for the last 8 years, because the war in Ukraine did not begin 11 days ago. It began in 2014, 8 years ago, when the elected Ukrainian government was overthrown in a US organized coup, the parliament set on fire, the president scampering for his life, and members of the Ukrainian parliament at gunpoint, being forced to sign into law a variety of anti-Russian language measures which guaranteed that the people of eastern Ukraine would reject the coup and seek to defend their language and their culture. Every single day for the last 8 years, the Ukrainian armed forces, spearheaded by their fascist militias, evidence of whom is so overwhelming, it is stunning to me that so many people in the West merely avert their eyes. They merely turn away. You show them the swastikas, the jackboots, the SS insignia, the Hitler salutes, the statues to the people who massacred Polish and Ukrainian Jews in overwhelming number. You show them that the IKEA store of all stores, if you don't know the history of IKEA, look it up, is situated on Stepan Bandera Avenue in the capital city of Kiev. Bandera is the spiritual father, the arch collaborator, the Jew killer, the man who massacred Jews from Poland and Ukraine and then put the rest on the trains to Auschwitz, where they were industrially gassed by the Nazi filth. Anyone who imagines that Russia, a country which lost 26 million people to the Nazi barbarians, would be sanguine about the presence of, just across their border, the massed ranks of fascism, is an idiot, an ignorant fool who didn't know it, or an idiot who did know it, but who thought that nonetheless this could be tolerable. We are now funding, Germany is now funding and arming Nazis in Ukraine. What could possibly go wrong? The truth of the matter is these two new developments, breaking this day, take us into a dark and potentially catastrophic period of this 8-year war in Ukraine. One last word. The United States government, at the level of undersecretaries of state, have gone to Venezuela, Caracas, to try to kiss and make up with Nicolas Maduro and the forces loyal to the late Hugo Chavez. After having destroyed Venezuela for years, sending assassination squads to murder Maduro, the United States, alarmed at the fantastic levels of inflation now visible in the American economy, are trying to persuade Venezuela to abandon Russia and China and return to the pre-Chavez days as a banana republic under the tutelage of the United States. I'm sure that Maduro will tell them where to go, but it's a measure of how dirty realpolitik can be. In fact, people who predicted the crashing and burning of the Russian economy forgot one thing. They forgot China. They forgot that China will be the biggest economy in the whole world very, very soon. It's 2022. They say it will be before 2030. I'm predicting to you it will be before 2025. Everything Russia produces, China needs. The Visa cards that cut off in Moscow have been immediately replaced by a Union card operating through China's banking system. The strategic alliance between Russia and China changes everything. And when you factor in that Iran will in the next couple of days, be back on the international stage. The JCPOA reinstated, sanctions on Iran lifted. When you factor in that India, the second most populous country in the world, is closely aligned with Russia in this terrible conflict in the Ukraine, then you begin to see not just that Ukraine is dividing between East and West, but the world is dividing between East and West. And our problem, those of us who live in the West, is that the sun is rising in the East. Buckle up. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Yo, Mikey, what's happening? Joey! The usual? Sure. You looking fresh, man. You get a new haircut? Nah, brother. I just got that, scholarship from the College of Knowledge. Oh, you got into the University of the Airwaves? Sure did, brother. I got knowledge coming out of my ears. GG, man. He knows what's up. I knew there was something new about you. Yo, reckon he'd take me? Everyone is welcome, brother. Even from Jersey.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Well, it's not every day that you're forced to predict that we may be on the verge of a European war which could become a nuclear war. And I do it with the utmost gravity. And you should hear it with the utmost gravity too. We've got our poll running. Is NATO using the Ukrainian people for its own ends? Yes, A, B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube, and on my Telegram. Here are the telephone numbers because you'll want to have your say. Women callers are prioritized. Callers who disagree with me are prioritized. New callers are prioritized. All callers are welcome. If you're in the United Kingdom, it's 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. If you're in the United States, it's also toll free, so will cost you nothing. That's the United States and Canada. The number is +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And you can email the show at onair@moats.tv. I told you that last week we had a record audience of well in excess of 1 million. The show already at 7:23 is the highest audience that we have ever had in all this time, 125 episodes or so of Moats. Is NATO using the Ukrainian people for its own ends? My goodness, thousands of votes already. On Twitter, yes, 76%. No, 24%. YouTube, yes, 90%. No, 10%. Telegram, yes, 96%. No, 4%. Utterly extraordinary results. Now, Carl Jha is the host of the Silk and Steel podcast. He's Chinese, like me, married to an Indonesian wife, and he comes to us from Bali. I wish I was in Bali right now, Carl. Tell us, how is it there? It's about 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm guessing.
It is. I just woke up, so.
Well, you look remarkably fresh. Thanks for joining us at this unearthly hour for you. I wanted to start off with that news about Visa and I think MasterCard cutting Russia out, which has already now been replaced by the Union card, which will operate through Chinese banking. This is the shape of things to come, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I mean, this is probably the most self-defeating U.S. policy of 2022. I say that, and there's a lot of self-defeating U.S. policies because the West underestimate its own strength and you underestimate the power of China because China definitely got Russia's back. China and Russia have had a long-standing friendship, stretched all the way to at least 1989. A lot of people think China and Russia still stuck in the Sino-Soviet split era, but that era ended in 1989 when Gorbachev visited Beijing to meet up with Deng Xiaoping. And since then, China and Russia had excellent relationship. And it's not in the interest of China to see Russia fall before the power of NATO because they know they will be next if Russia does fail. And China now has the power to financially support Russia. So Visa and MasterCard, they're just essentially ceding grounds to the Chinese banking system at this moment.
Yes, and ditto the SWIFT, cancelling Russia's access to SWIFT, though not to the two accounts that deal with the import of oil and gas, although Russia has just closed the main pipeline to Germany. By cutting Russia out of SWIFT, Russia and China swiftly did a deal that will allow Russia to use the clearance apparatus in China.
Yeah, exactly. China actually created the SIP system, which is an alternative to SWIFT back in 2015 in anticipation of U.S. using SWIFT as a financial weapon. Now, SWIFT is one of the bases of U.S. dollar hegemony because, as we know, U.S. dollar enjoyed the status of world currency since World War II because U.S. was the world's largest economy. And then in 1970s, U.S. worked out a deal with Saudi Arabia to price the oil in U.S. dollars, and other oil producers followed suit. So this is what became known as petrodollar. This is the basis of petrodollar, and then financial strength is one of the pillars of the U.S. empire. And it's quite amazing to me now U.S. is sabotaging one of its own pillars of its own hegemony because now Russia will be forced to move off the dollar and to settle its trade with China, one of its top trading partner, in yuan. And this is just the beginning of an end for the dollar hegemony because as of earlier this year, Russia-China trade, only 17% was settled in yuan, but now they're going to move most of it in yuan. And this is just the beginning. I mean, Russia, U.S. did this to Iran a couple of years earlier, right? So we're going to see Russia, Iran, and pretty soon more people is going to switch off this SWIFT system because one of the reasons for the dollar hegemony is because it's not only U.S. was the world's largest economy, relatively stable, but because it's also relatively easy to use the system that's already in place. But now people will look at U.S. and see it as at any moment if their government became target of the U.S. government policy, that they could be taken off the SWIFT system. So U.S. dollar is no longer a safe haven currency, and more people are going to have their backup plans. And this is really, like I said, this is really the stupidest U.S. policy in the 2022 yet.
Yeah, although there's a long way to go in 2022, so we'll wait on that that prediction coming true. But you said NATO has China in its sights next, and that is abundantly clear. I've spent most of the last few months broadcasting in the United States about the hostile moves against China, the sailing of gunboats, the breaches of the One China policy by the United States, top officials going there. Pompeo was recently paid $150,000 to go and give a speech there, inching towards recognition of and independence of Taiwan that most Taiwanese Chinese people don't even want. And just today, the mighty military power of Australia, backed of course by its AUKUS partners, America and the UK, refused to rule out arming Taiwan. Now, actually arming Taiwan would be an imminent warning to the Chinese that whilst they have no wish to reunify their country by force, they better reunify it by force before NATO and AUKUS make reunification impossible. They're going to try and turn Taiwan into the new Ukraine.
That is what U.S. would like to do, but unfortunately, the current way to do about it, I doubt they will succeed. First of all, U.S. is trying to goad the People's Liberation Army into carrying out a major military operation against Taiwan. So U.S. will have an excuse to start a huge war in Pacific. This is basically the doctrine of U.S. Navy. As a matter of fact, while the Ukraine war is going on, U.S. Navy just put a statement that U.S. can fight two-front war because it's budget season and
they showed that in Afghanistan, Carl.
Yeah, I mean, U.S. wanted to, right now, it's budget season, and U.S. Navy would very much like to have a larger share of its $770 billion military budget pie. They don't want all of that going to Europe. They want to stress their own importance. Therefore, they bring up Taiwan. But U.S. traditionally have been selling weapons to Taiwan under its so-called the Taiwan Relation Act, which doesn't even obligate U.S. to necessarily come to defense of Taiwan. It just says U.S. should help Taiwan to defend itself. And that U.S. military-industrial complex has interpreted that as selling these high-budget, expensive weapons to Taiwan that the Taiwanese people themselves recognize are probably useless in any kind of war scenario break out. But they understand they have to continually pay this money.
Yeah, it's protection. It's protection money.
Exactly.
It's like the Sopranos or Don Corleone. Protection money.
Exactly. So this is right now. They just want to keep the racket going. I mean, basically, for U.S. military-industrial complex, Taiwan is a good grift because they can annually sell Taiwan all these expensive, outdated, useless weapons, and everybody gets a share. People in the Pentagon gets kickback, and Lockheed Martin, they have not tidy profit. So I think this is a goal. Their goal is to keep the tension high so that can keep increase the military budget, keep selling weapons to Taiwan. But I don't think even the crazy hawks necessarily want the actual hot war over Taiwan Strait because China is a nuclear power, and they also understand any kind of hot war, shooting war between U.S. and China will quickly escalate into a nuclear exchange in 20 minutes. So I think their sense of self-preservation is just as strong as ours, George. So I do not foresee they planning for active war, but they will definitely keep cranking up the tension because that's how they profit from this grift.
Well, don't be complacent about that. I've met Steve Bannon, and I assure you, nothing would please him more than standing on the bridge of a U.S. gunboat sailing down the Yangtze. The crazies in Washington would very much like a war with China on the basis, if you think back to the Korean War, where they actively contemplated the use of nuclear weapons before China developed such weapons itself. They now think that they're going to have to fight a war with China eventually, so better do it now than later when China can only be stronger.
There is that thought in Washington that they have a very small, limited time window, maybe 5 to 10 years, where U.S. still enjoy military superiority over China. But yet, U.S. also know they don't no longer have regional dominance around the Taiwan Strait. You know, U.S. used to sell its aircraft carrier group through the Taiwan Strait. Now they only sell one ship at a time because China's land-based missile could saturate the Taiwan Strait at any time. If a war breaks out, any U.S. ship in the Taiwan Strait will be sitting target, and the U.S. Navy understands that. And on top of that, China is in no hurry to militarily resolve Taiwan issue because really the most dangerous time in Taiwan Strait was back in 1958. Right after Korean War. At that time, during the Kinmen crisis, when mainland China and Taiwan government exchanged artillery shells to the scale of several 100,000 artillery shells per day, that's that time U.S. actually actively contemplated use nuclear weapons against mainland China in case the People's Liberation Army cross the ocean and take the island. But that was back when U.S. actually actively stationed nuclear-tipped missiles on Taiwan, pointed at mainland. But since for the last 30 years, though, not only shelling has stopped, but there's increased economic integration between mainland China and Taiwan. Now there's over 1 million Taiwanese people working, studying, and live on mainland China. The economic Taiwan, 40% of the Taiwan's export go to mainland China. That integration will only deepen as time comes. So China, from China's perspective, China is not a hurry to force the issue by military. But you are right. There are elements in Pentagon that probably want to stir up the tensions and stir up the trouble.
Well, as a famous Chinese man once said, sometimes the enemy struggles mightily to lift a huge stone only to drop it on its own feet. Lastly, and I'm grateful for your time at this hour, China is the main trading partner with an astonishing number of places now in the world, possibly with most countries in the world. Every country in Latin America, for example, from Mexico to Chile, has as its main trading partner China. But I was amazed to discover this afternoon that Germany has China as its main trading partner. We're now sailing into what might become a general European war. And China and Russia are strategic allies, as close as can be. What's that going to mean for European-Chinese relations? How long before the boycott of all things Russian becomes a call to boycott all things China, and then actually there'll be nothing to eat, use, or play with?
Exactly. I mean, in fact, Germany's foreign minister, before the war broke out in Ukraine, warned China that Germany will use its economic power if China comes out on the side of Russia. But it's an empty threat, because what is Germany going to do? Germany needs China more than China needs Germany. Is Germany going to threaten to cut off sales of luxury car to the Chinese market? That's their largest market, their largest export market. And, you will definitely, I mean, this is, again, EU has already been forced to take side with the United States against Russia when it comes to the European gas deal. But if they're going to do that to their largest trading partner, China, they're really going to they're really lifting the stone and and hitting their own feet. I mean, I don't see they will go to that extreme, because even Germany's denial of certification of Nord Stream 2 to Russia, it's just a temporary thing, because that could easily reversible. It's not like they're uninstalling the pipelines, right? So their calculus is probably, once the crisis is over, they can review the process and recertify the pipeline again. So I don't see them simultaneously take on China and Russia at the same time. That's just suicidal.
Carl Jha, thank you for joining us on board on the mother of all talk shows. A real pleasure to meet you finally. Now, here's my first question. In this week, in 2009, 17-year-old Neymar, that's Neymar Jr., made his professional football debut. Who was he playing for? A, Barcelona, B, Santos, C, Corinthians. Answer after the break.
Comrade, tired of being trapped in mainstream media? Join the revolution with mother of all talk shows. Has been instrumental in making brain and heart of people stronger, like kettlebell for mind. Don't be brainwashed, CC, an open mind to new way of thinking. If you don't know how, George will teach you. If you won't learn, he will make you. Speak to Comrade Galloway if you think you're hard enough on the mother of all talk shows.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Who writes that stuff? It's wonderful. Okay, 17-year-old Neymar in 2009, in this week, made his debut in professional football with Santos, which, if I'm not wrong, is the club that Pele played for. Is NATO using the Ukrainian people for its own ends? My goodness, what a poll. The poll on Thursday in the Moats Extra was the biggest one we've ever had. It had 7,000 votes. This one's heading perhaps to beat that. Is NATO using the Ukrainian people for its own ends? A, yes. B, no. So far, it is utterly, overwhelmingly in the affirmative. Now, Donald Courter is an American in Moscow. He's a journalist and a political analyst and an all-round rising star. As you saw the last time, he was on the mother of all talk shows. What a build-up, Donald. Don't let us down. Very nice to see you. Now, it's not, of course, possible for you to talk to people anywhere in the European Union, anywhere in North America, through the normal channels on Moscow-based televisions. But people are, all the evidence is, seeking out actively ways that they can listen to you and your colleagues. But how are you feeling? Are you feeling isolated?
Hey, George, thanks a lot for inviting me on the program. I mean, the fact that you invited me on your program is the first indication that I don't feel very isolated, actually. I've had basically equal amounts of support from people around the world. I've gotten tons of more attention, actually, on my social media platforms now that I'm presenting to the Western people what their governments don't want them to see. It's actually become sort of given me a lot of popularity, especially because also my Twitter now says Russian state affiliated media, even though I'm, it's my personal page, not associated with RT where I work and everything. I've been getting just as much support as I have been getting death threats and people sending me my personal address simply because I work at RT. So I can't say I feel alienated. No, more in the spotlight, 100%. Yeah.
Well, the book they try to ban always goes to the top of the bestseller list. But, I mean, every cloud has a silver lining. At least Western politicians and hack so-called journalists will never again be able to claim that whilst Russia and China censor the media, they have a free media space. Although you'd be amazed that given we've got Julian Assange in a dungeon right now, how many of them still try to spin that ludicrous line?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say about, in terms of media censorship, it's the most hypocritical thing that in the West, the governments and the media say that they live in the freest societies in the world, when, let's not forget, it's not Russia that blocked Western media first. It was the West that blocked Russian media first. RT and Sputnik were blocked over there, and in response, Russia blocked, I have the list right here, Radio Free America, BBC, Deutsche Welle, ABC, this list goes on and on. But the funniest thing actually is that once these outlets were banned in Russia, they called it an attack on independent media. But in reality, all of these are either owned by huge corporations or run by the government. Deutsche Welle, German government, BBC, British government, Radio Free America, American government. So it's just like really hypocritical to me, you know?
Well, one of the things that we now know, some of us always did know, but everyone now knows, that even where corporations are privately owned, they are entirely under the thumb of the state that they are based in. So nobody seriously believes that, say, Twitter or Facebook would have continued to allow free speech if the American government instructed them not to. So the idea that we have in this country and countries like it, maybe it died in Canada actually over the truckers thing, that whatever the state interest, not the popular interest, but the state interest of Western power dictates, the corporations follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest and most contemporary example is in Ukraine, for example. I mean, this is a perfect example of the United States state and the media working hand in hand here. The media ratings go way up by spreading this anti-Russia hysteria throughout the Western world, making everyone scared of the big bad guy, Russia. And at the same time, the state gets to, militarize Eastern Europe against Russia, saying it's the bad guy in this whole Ukraine conflict thing.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because we now have a situation where Formula One drivers, tennis players, opera singers, orchestral conductors, ice skaters, ballet dancers are all being told by their European and North American employers that unless they denounce the president of their own country, they will be fired from their jobs. Now, just imagine, it's unimaginable, but try and imagine this, Donald. Imagine if in Western countries it was said to Israeli ballet dancers or conductors or sports people, denounce the government of Israel or you will be fired. Can you imagine, quite rightly, the scandal that would be, the popular outrage that would ensue?
Yeah, it's absolutely ludicrous to even think that could possibly happen. But just because it's happening against Russia right now, it's considered just normal in the Western world. And it's also silly because the U.S. government and European countries are saying that all these sanctions are against the Russian government. They're not against the Russian people. But this is exactly one example of this negatively affecting the Russian people, basically putting athletes and ballet dancers and everyone you noted there in a position where they have to betray their own country, basically, whether they agree with the government or not, but they have to basically publicly denounce their own government just to do what they love with their lives. I mean, not to mention the fact that the collapse of the ruble is not just hurting the Russian government, it's hurting all of Russia, and it's causing a rise in prices of all imported goods. It's not, these sanctions are hurting ordinary people, not the state.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be a live Russian. The Dostoevsky course at the University of Milan has been cancelled. As far as I know, Dostoevsky died about 150 years ago, but he's banned. In fact, you don't even have to be Russian. There's serious people discussing what to do about a statue of Friedrich Engels outside a library in Manchester, where he wrote the epic history of the working class in England. He's German, or he was when he died in the 19th century. This is how widespread and how deeply this madness has gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are even the more, less dangerous examples of the consequences of this kind of Russophobic behavior. We also heard about the Russian embassy in Australia that was sent envelopes with a suspicious white powder. We saw that the Russian embassy in France was also vandalized. I mean, this whole situation is causing the Western world to get into some sort of anti-Russian frenzy.
It is quite extraordinary, I must say. You'd think it was the only war going on right now. You'd think the Yemen war wasn't actually happening, even though it's American and British weapons that are being used in that war, that are laying waste the poorest people on the earth. You'd think that wasn't even happening. There's no armbands for Yemen, no Eiffel Tower being lit up for Yemen, no sanctions against the arms manufacturers whose product is massacring children in Yemen right now.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if most people who are actually, making a huge fuss over this Russian military operation in Ukraine even knew the details about the conflict there, or if they had as much care as they have right now for when Afghanistan was occupied by the United States for 20 years, or Libya was bombed by NATO. I mean, there's so much rhetoric that we see. That we've seen in the Western media that goes to show the double standards. People saying, "Oh, this is the greatest tragedy that Europe has seen since World War II," just because this war is happening on European territory. But
they forget about Yugoslavia. Belgrade is a great European capital. The Yugoslav Serbian people are blonde and blue-eyed. They're European. They're even Christians.
Yeah, it's crazy, really.
Now, I wanted to ask you, you may not have further particulars, but it seems to me that the breaking story about the discovery of biological weapons laboratories near the Russian border in Ukraine is a potential game changer, at least in public relations terms. Have you any further and better particulars on that?
Well, I did see today, just several hours ago, there were documents connected to this that were released. I couldn't read them because they were in Ukrainian, but it seems like the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying that it has some significant evidence to suggest that Ukraine was, hosting some sort of bioweapons labs that were funded by the United States. I haven't seen, we have to look to see how further evidence comes forward, but this is actually something that was rumored to have been taking place for years now, actually. So it's interesting to see that these documents come forward and what's going to come next.
And what about Blinken's pronouncement just a few hours ago that the US will green light, a very interesting phrase, making obvious, if it wasn't before, that the US decides what NATO does, will green light NATO warplanes being sent into the theater of war.
Yeah, I did see that. I saw Anthony Blinken speaking with, if I'm not mistaken, Ukraine's foreign minister on the ground about that. And it's obviously very startling. And it's just another reason, in my opinion, for why these negotiations between Russia and Ukraine are taking so long. It's very clear that Zelensky and the Kiev government is stalling for time as long as possible so it can get more and more support in terms of weapons and money from Western Europe and the United States, as well as getting thousands more international volunteers who are, support these neo-fascists in Ukraine and are coming to join the Ukrainian military and fight Russia alongside the Ukrainian military. I mean, Russia really obviously wants these negotiations to be successful. They want Ukraine to be denazified. They want it to be neutral. And they don't want it to be a military threat to Russia anymore. And it really, Moscow really does not want to have to overthrow the Ukrainian government. That would be, it would be a terrible enterprise for Ukraine. It would necessitate probably a military occupation, which Russia has time and time again said it doesn't want to do. And the only way to guarantee that none of that is going to happen is if the Ukrainian government negotiates. But like we're seeing now, as these negotiations go at a snail's pace, Ukraine continues to get weapons and probably is going to get these planes from the West as these negotiations continue. And not much has actually been accomplished. I mean, the biggest thing that was accomplished, I think we could say, is that humanitarian corridors were agreed upon, and the most significant one was established out of Mariupol, which is the location where it's one of the most hotly contested areas between the neo-fascist militias in Ukraine and the Russian military. They created a humanitarian corridor through there so that civilians can escape the fighting. And the last thing I saw about that was a statement from the Russian Ministry of Defense saying not one civilian actually used that humanitarian corridor. And what reports are saying, and I've seen unverified videos of this as well, is that these neo-fascist militias are not letting civilians leave.
So how this go on then? This goes on and on?
Sorry?
So the fighting just goes on?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I mean, the fighting is going on and on. The delegations have only agreed on these humanitarian corridors, but it looks like in practice they're not panning out so well. Another thing that's important to mention is just a couple days ago, it was confirmed that one of the members of the Ukrainian delegation negotiating with the Russian delegation was killed.
Yeah.
He was arrested by the Ukrainian Secret Service on suspicion that he was betraying his country, on suspicion. No trial, nothing. He was arrested by the secret police and killed. And this was just reports for a little while, but then the Ukrainian government confirmed it.
They did, and I've seen the picture of his body, 2 bullets to the chest.
Yeah.
Imagine if a Russian negotiator had been murdered by the Russian intelligence on his return to Moscow. That would have been a rather bigger story than the murder of poor Denis, the Ukrainian negotiator. Donald, thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. I'm glad you're still in good spirits. Be sure and stay healthy. Now, coming up in the next hour, I'm talking to Peter Coffin, podcaster, author, and political analyst, and we're taking your calls. But first of all, it's the news. With Elliot King, he's back.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and French President Emmanuel Macron spoke by phone today in a call that lasted 1 hour and 45 minutes, the French presidency says. Both leaders have spoken by phone on Thursday in talks that left Macron with the impression that Putin's goal was to take the whole of Ukraine, according to a French official. The Kremlin has said that Vladimir Putin told his French counterpart Macron that Ukraine was responsible for the provocation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Macron is one of several world leaders who have talked to Putin in recent days, hoping to broker a ceasefire in Ukraine. Earlier today, Putin spoke with Turkish President Recep Erdogan, who appealed for an urgent cessation of hostilities. According to a Kremlin readout of the call, Putin told Erdogan that Ukraine's negotiators should take a more constructive approach at talks, fully taking into account the emerging realities. It was underlined that the suspension of the special operation is only possible if Ukraine stops military operations and carries out well-known Russian demands, says the Kremlin. A second attempt to evacuate civilians from the Ukraine city of Mariupol has failed, and both sides once again blaming each other for breaking the ceasefire. The shelling of the southeastern city has continued today, which has prevented the planned evacuation of civilians for a second time this weekend. It is extremely dangerous to take people out under such conditions, the city council said in an online statement. Visa and MasterCard have announced they will suspend all operations in Russia in protest at its invasion of the Ukraine. Cards issued by Russian banks will no longer be supported by the networks, the payment giants said on Saturday. Both firms have also said that cards issued abroad will no longer work at businesses or ATMs in Russia. But Russia's major banks, including state-backed Sberbank, have already downplayed the impact the move will have on their clients. Shell, however, has defended its decision to purchase Russian crude oil despite the war in Ukraine. The oil giant said in a statement that the decision to purchase the fuel at a discount price was difficult. It confirmed that it had brought a cargo of Russian crude oil on Friday, but it had no alternative. Russian oil currently makes up about 8% of world supply, but around 40% of the EU's. One of Shell's refineries, which produces diesel and petrol and other products, is also among the biggest in Europe. A Shell spokesperson said, "To be clear, without any uninterrupted supply of crude oil to refineries, the energy industry cannot assure continued provisions of essential products to people across Europe over the weeks ahead." Britons should not head to Ukraine to fight and should instead help however they can from the UK, the head of the armed forces has said. Speaking to the BBC, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin rejected Ukraine's calls for a no-fly zone, saying it would not help tactically and might escalate fighting. On Britons wanting to join the fight, Radakin said that the sound of gunfire was not something you want to rush to, and urged people to support Ukraine in sensible ways from the UK. Asked whether Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had been right to say that she would support any Briton who wanted to fight, he said, "We can all understand the sentiment, and that sentiment needs to be channeled into support for Ukraine." The Foreign Enlistment Act of 1870 makes it an offence for a UK citizen to fight for a foreign power at war with the state the UK is at peace with. As the UK is not at war with Russia, this would make it illegal to join the Ukrainian International Brigade. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called for a senior parliamentary committee to investigate claims Boris Johnson pushed for a Russian-born businessman to get a peerage, despite security concerns. It has been reported that the security services withdrew an assessment that given newspaper proprietor Evgeny Lebedev an honour posed a security risk at the Johnsons intervened. It has been reported that the security services withdrew an assessment that giving newspaper proprietor Evgeny Lebedev an honour posed a security risk after the Johnsons intervened. Starmer said he was very concerned about the case. However, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab insisted there was no impropriety. 6 people, including 2 children, have been killed by a tornado that has struck a state in the United States. The tornado ripped through Madison County, which is southwest of the state capital Des Moines, in Iowa. The heavy storms caused more than 10,500 people in Des Moines to lose power. The National Service added the tornado was an EF3, meaning that it swirled with winds of up to 206 miles per hour. Madison County Emergency Managing Director Dejeuner Ayala later confirmed that 4 children and 2 adults had been killed when the twister hit around 4:30 p.m. local time. The family of the cricketer Shane Warne has accepted the offer of a state funeral, according to Victoria's Premier Dan Andrews. Legendary Australian spinner Warne died of a suspected heart attack in Thailand on Friday, aged 52. Flowers, beer and photographs have been left at Warne's statue at the Melbourne Cricket Ground as fans pay tribute. It will be an opportunity for Victorians to pay tribute to his contribution to his sport, to our state and our country, Andrews said. State funerals are held to honour people of national significance. Warne took 708 wickets, the second most of all time, in 145 tests across a stellar 15-year international career that ended in 2007, and has recently been quoted as the greatest cricketer of all time. And finally, British cat owners are calling for manufacturer Purina to remove its brand of cat food, Felix As Good As It Looks, from shelves, claiming its new recipe has caused their pets to feel unwell. Facebook group Cats Recently Affected by Felix Food has more than 28,000 members from across the UK who claim their cats began vomiting, experiencing kidney problems and feeling lethargic after consuming the popular cat food. The recipe was changed in March 2021, and shortly afterwards pet owners began reporting a change in their cat's behaviour and health. Last year, the group launched a petition calling for the product to be recalled, which received more than 11,000 signatures.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Record numbers, record callers, record number of new callers, heading for a record number of votes on the poll. You can vote on my Twitter feed, my YouTube, and my Telegram. And frankly, I'd be here till Tuesday if I were to read out all the social media comments. Scouser Lar says NATO cares for the people of Ukraine in the same way they cared for the people of Libya. And Voila says, never was NATO a charity. NATO itself is being used by the USA, while this superpower needs someone to handle Europe so they can have time to terrorize China. And Stuart Wheeler says, NATO certainly do not seem to want it to end. Who, apart from France, is actually pushing for an end rather than an escalation? No one is giving any credence to long-standing, long-recognized Russian concerns. Putin has made a big mistake, but did he have any other cards to play? And J.P. Hughes says this proxy war is about preserving US global dominance, an attempt to neutralize Russia and contain China to prevent the emergence of a new multipolar world. Ukraine will be the next Afghanistan. Well, let's talk to an American. Joining me now from the United States is Peter Coffin. He's the host of the PACD podcast. He's an author and a political analyst, and he joins me now. I hope, Peter, thank you for joining us. One of the things I wanted to ask you is how the left in politics, I know left and right don't mean quite what they used to mean, and I know that there's a lot of cross-dressing, and I know that the Democrats, whilst imagined in Europe to be the left of the American political spectrum, clearly are up to their neck in this latest war, as well as sundry crimes against the workers in America. But what about left of the Democrats? Where are the socialists and progressives in the United States lining up on this?
Well, I would say you end up seeing a lot of people who are identifying as maybe a socialist or a communist or what have you. And those folks are not necessarily really taking a different line than the Democrats. I mean, we see people like the various streamers, the people like Vosh or There's any number of the surf. A lot of streamers, a lot of YouTubers, a lot of these sort of alternative media people who have cultivated an image for themselves as more radical than the Democrats are ultimately not really coming off as that different than the Democrats, or at least noticeably. I don't see a lot of difference. I don't see a lot of people paying much attention to the fact that there's a Nazi or neo-Nazi paramilitary incorporated officially into the National Guard of the Ukraine. Ukraine. I was born in the 1980s and went to school when they were still calling it the Ukraine.
Very funny. The left of the Democrats then, Bernie Sanders and the people around him, they seem to be as gung-ho as Uncle Joe.
Yeah. Bernie, I think, has really unfortunately come off in a manner that has, I think, disappointed a lot of the people who gained political consciousness in the 2015-16 campaign. We had Bernie Sanders sort of preaching a very different paradigm, or at least different than what you would ever expect to see in the mainstream media, preaching a very different paradigm than the Democrats were then. But he's lockstep with them now. Like, if we had elected him president, it's hard to believe that something would be going differently right now.
And yet the right is where at least skepticism and sometimes outright opposition is to be found. The Tucker Carlson on Fox News, who doesn't want a war with Russia but seems to quite fancy one with China. And I know a few American correspondents like that. The Ron Paul Institute, people on the libertarian and right wing of American politics. Other than Tulsi Gabbard, I'm not sure if she's left or right, but she made the best statement on it so far.
Well, I would say a lot of the sort of right wing people we're seeing sort of preaching an isolationist view, which in terms of, whether we should be going to war with various small countries that can't defend themselves against the United States, that's at least a better view, I would say, than what you could say that there are a lot of currents in conservatism right now that are very anti-war from a kind of nationalist perspective, not necessarily the best perspective in the world, but ultimately, like, if you're really looking for war hawks, it's that you just look in the Democrats right now, as far as I'm concerned.
I saw a poll, very interested in it. It showed that 53% of Americans polled believe that the United States should get involved if this comes to a wider European war, which I think is actually a very small majority indeed. But when it was broken down into class, into socioeconomic terms, the richer you were, the more keen on a war you were. The poorer you were, the poorest people in America that were polled, only 23% of them wanted America to join the war. But the richest Americans, 67% of them wanted to get involved in a war. That's quite telling, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny that the more likely you are to have a stock portfolio, which may include various defense contractors, the more likely you are to support some form of international intervention. It's so strange. I don't know where that's coming from. It's weird.
Hard to understand, I know.
Yeah.
The Trumpers, where do they stand? Where is DeSantis and Trump himself?
Well, I haven't actually heard a lot from them. I've heard some kind of vague criticisms from the sort of DeSantis Trump camp, but I think a lot of them kind of see this as not necessarily a full-on like an interventionist war. I think a lot of people in that area are seeing this more as like a war of conquest, and I don't know that they really have a position for the U.S. military there, because I see a lot of people who like voted for Trump saying things like, we shouldn't be over there. But like at the moment, we're not really in a position where we're quote unquote over there. So I don't know exactly what that person meant. I don't know. I see more of that on Facebook than I see, talking to a lot. I've talked to a lot of different people about this. Most of them I would pin as apolitical, more so than the sort of MAGA Trump people. And there's a balance in between sort of a skepticism that I don't think was there a couple of weeks ago, and this sort of the more liberal you get, the more it seems like you're willing to just flat out support this, and you're saying like, we need to donate money to the Ukrainian military. Zelensky's out on the front lines, even though that's been disproven, that type of thing. I would say the closer to the sort of apolitical center, and I specify apolitical center because you can have kind of a liberal-ish center, but I'd say the closer to the apolitical center you are, the more likely you are to be skeptical. I'm not saying it's a definite thing that tracks on there, but that's at least what I've noticed in speaking with people.
Well, this is a global audience you're talking to now, many of whom, because they've got good sense, want to know what is being said in America. Who would you recommend people start checking out, start following, including your good selves, of course?
Well, yeah, obviously we would like people to listen to the Pact podcast, but I would send people towards Caleb Maupin. I would send people towards people in that orbit, more or less. A lot of them are just a lot more concerned with, getting the story from people who are actually there. Like I know several folks who don't necessarily have like a large presence, but they've been relaying information to various people in that circle from like the two breakaway republics in Donbass. I think that basically look who Caleb Maupin is retweeting right now. There's I'm sorry, I don't have a list of people.
No, that's okay. Caleb is a good friend of the show. He's often a guest on the show, so he could be the gateway to others, because sensible people want to hear from other voices. Lastly, Peter, absolutely. I know it's only just broken, but Blinken has green-lighted NATO warplanes to enter the war. This, if followed through, I see Poland has already rejected it, but this, if followed through, could be the precursor of a general European war, which could, of course, become a nuclear war. Is that dawning on people in America yet?
I think a lot. What's strange is they actually kind of took this World War III angle early on in the narrative, and then it kind of fizzled out as Russia didn't attack for several weeks. And I don't know that it's really sort of set in that there is an actual possibility of that, because I think people they took it on. They were like, oh no, World War III is coming. And then it didn't. And I think they've kind of moved on from it. But I especially with what you're saying there, I certainly am more concerned with a European land war / air war. That's not something any of us want. And I hope that more Americans understand that they need to be skeptical, and they can't be supporting this imperialist type of aggression, whether it comes directly from America or from one of our satellites.
Peter Coffin, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Other products are available, whatever that was you just drank. Is NATO using the Ukrainian people for its own ends? 6,100 people have already voted. We're nearly at the record. Is NATO using the Ukrainian people for its own ends? On Twitter, yes, 75%, no, 25%. On YouTube, yes, 90%, no, 10%. And on Telegram, yes, 95%, no, 5%. Unbelievable numbers. Now, I've got a question. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became Soviet leader. Who did he replace? A. Antonov, B. Brezhnev, C. Chernenko. Answer after the break.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As vicious as the Twitter sphere, where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
And it's a very, thank you for, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view. George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
And the answer is Chernenko. Mikhail Gorbachev became Soviet leader in 1985, succeeding Chernenko, who was in charge for a year and 1 day, dying on March 10th, 1985. Sir Jack Union says Putin has played himself into the hands of NATO, otherwise known as the United States. He is now globally vilified and despised. Russia has been weakened by his stupidity. And Yacht Ninke says the West is using ethno-nationalists to fight Russia, who actually admit to enjoying fighting. This will solve the problem of weakening the elements they've let run riot in Ukraine. Graham 354 says NATO needs to go, as it is being used to promote the US corporate-run unipolar world they aspire to. And Darren Young says, you find it impossible to look critically at Russia, don't you? Is it only the salary that matters to you, or is it something ideological? Well, Darren, there's two parts to my answer to that. I have been with Russia for more than 50 years, long before I ever worked for any Russian media outfit. And now I don't work for any Russian media outfit because they've been closed down and I cannot be paid. So that's the part of the nasty part of your question that I wanted to deal with comprehensively. Although let me say in brackets that thanks to Max Kaiser and his advice a decade ago to get Bitcoin at $10 each, I actually don't need to be paid by anyone. Cry more. Cry more. But as to whether I can look at Russia critically, that's simply not true. I have said many times on Russian media, many times on Russian media, that if I was in Russia, I wouldn't have voted for Vladimir Putin. I would have voted for the main opposition candidate, who did rather well and was the candidate of a party that is the main opposition party in the Duma. I'm all for the Russian opposition party. But here's the bad news for you, Darren. That's the Communist Party of Russia. It's Putin or the communists in Russia. Cry more. Is NATO using the Ukrainian people for its own ends? You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube, on my Telegram. I can tell you that it is a new record high poll. 6,700 people have voted. It beats the record of last Thursday of 6,200, but that poll lasted 3 hours. This one is lasting only 2. So let me take some calls. Paula is in High Wycombe. Welcome, Paula.
Oh, just a minute. Oh, hang on a sec. Oh, my God.
What's wrong? I can hear you clearly.
Sorry, George. Are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you well. The whole world's listening.
I'm so sorry. The moment I get my big moment, a phone call comes in.
Don't worry about it. Take it easy.
Okay. I hope the phone call goes away so I can speak to you, yeah?
That's okay. We can't hear it. Don't worry.
Oh, good. Okay. What it is, George, and my head's a bit like, my brain probably is a bit like scrambled eggs at the moment, but the first one was I wanted to talk about freedom of speech, well, probably anywhere in the world, but especially in the UK, regarding what's going on in Ukraine at the moment.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Take your time. Take your time.
Yeah, sorry, excuse me. Sorry. Sorry. Basically what happened was, and it sort of alludes to the comment before last you were reading out, I think, about that you didn't appear to be, criticising Russia's part. You were more supporting it rather than being against it. But basically, I happened to mention on a site, and I know it's very controversial, and probably makes me sound like the crazy woman, but wouldn't the simplest solution to this at the very moment, all things taken into account, be that Putin should be, well, I certainly think he should be brought to the international courts, the courts at Hague for war
Yeah,
crimes. Sorry.
well, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown called for that today. You might find that slightly ironic, Paula.
I do. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. The Gordon Brown and Sir Tony Blair called for Vladimir Putin to be tried at The Hague.
I think of better people to make that call, namely yourself, George.
No, I absolutely would not make that call. Anyone who blames Putin for this crisis has not been paying attention, or worse than that, they simply don't care about the 14,000 dead people in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian citizens killed by the Ukrainian armed forces. They would simply have to have been ignorant of the massive presence of the most vicious anti-Semite and fascist forces doing that killing. They would have to be ignorant of NATO's intention to push further and further down the European plain, which has been the traditional place through which Russia was invaded from the West. You have to know these things. You have to be able to walk in the other fellow's shoes. You have to know that Napoleon invaded Russia across that plain. You have to know that the British in 1920 invaded Russia down that plain. You'd have to know that Hitler invaded Russia down that plain. And you'd have to know that no Russian government, led by anyone who was sentient, could possibly allow people who are absolutely hostile to Russia to move their weapons, including nuclear weapons, closer and closer and closer to Russia's borders. So Actually, if you want someone to blame for what's happening in Ukraine, the blame lies in the West, not in the East, Paula.
Such as it may be, George, and I must admit, I do need, my research needs to be upgraded in that regard. But in any case, are you seriously telling me that Ukraine, okay, I know we're talking about nuclear weapons, but has any chance of standing against the might of Russia?
No,
are you really saying that
of course not. You didn't listen to me.
Sorry, go on.
If Ukraine joins NATO, it will have American military bases and American nuclear weapons inside its territory. 5 minutes flying time from Russia. How can you possibly... Would the United States allow Russian nuclear weapons in Mexico or Chinese nuclear weapons in Canada? Would they?
Oh, well, let's be frank. It's not a question of whether what Putin would allow. And to be honest, really honest
why
with you,
is it not? Why is it not? Why, Paula, why is it not? Why don't you answer that question? Would Biden allow Russian nuclear weapons in Mexico pointing at the United States? Would he allow
the analogy
Chinese?
Is irrelevant.
Why is it irrelevant? Why? How?
Because it's we're talking about the here and now. We're talking about what's going on now.
We are talking about the here and now. Ukraine asked to join NATO. That's here and now.
Okay. Okay, and why shouldn't they in the circumstances?
Well, would Mexico and Canada be permitted to join a military alliance with Russia and China, with Russian and Chinese nuclear weapons on America's border? Would they?
I still think it's an irrelevance. We've got to talk about what's happening now, George.
But it is now. Ukraine asked to join NATO.
Yeah.
Now.
Okay, Ukraine is asked to join, not Mexico or Canada or wherever you're
But why is my analogy not relevant? How could it not be relevant?
Because you're not dealing with the facts of what's happening this minute, this day, this hour.
You're right. The only one of my 3 examples that actually exists is the threat of American nuclear weapons in Ukraine. You're right. There are no Russian nuclear weapons in Mexico. There are no Chinese nuclear weapons in Canada. But Ukraine has asked to join the nuclear-armed military alliance called NATO. Now, if you think Russia would allow that, you must think that Biden would allow my 2 examples of Mexico and Canada.
Do you want me to be really frank with you, George?
Oh, I'm sure you're going to be, Paula.
I am actually, now that I've garnered my emotions a bit.
Yeah.
But they are still very strong in other respects.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I've just really got this stupid call coming. I'm sorry. My solution to it, the simplest solution as I see it, it's very controversial.
Yeah.
So please don't cut me off.
I haven't cut you off before now, despite all the difficulties in this conversation, Paula. So go on.
Such as what, George?
Such as calls coming in when you're talking to me, such as you breaking down, such as you breaking down in tears. I haven't cut you off, and I haven't cut you off, and I'm not going to cut you off. So give me your highly controversial solution.
Putin should be assassinated.
And how are you going to manage that, Paula?
Well, obviously, it's not going to happen under my watch, under my instruction, should I say.
Do you normally go on the airwaves calling for the assassination of world leaders, Paula?
No, not at all. But are we to respect Putin then in this situation?
Well,
is that what you're saying, George?
Do you call for the assassination of everybody you don't respect?
No, of course not.
Quite.
But I just think it's a heinous crime that's happening at the moment. And in large terms, as I was trying to allude to a few moments ago, I've admired you so much. You can't believe it over the years, okay? But on last week's show, in the last 30 minutes or so, when you started to take a walk down a different avenue, I thought, do I know the George Galloway I've been listening to all these years, okay? And that is your.
Well, I'm sorry I haven't taken you with me on my arguments, but I really ask you to take stock of what I've said. It seemed to me that you didn't actually know some of the things that I was telling you, and you had not grasped some of the points that I was making. I hope you will study more. But you got plenty of freedom of speech, Paula, and I'm glad that you called in. Ian is in Ontario, in Canada. Go ahead, Ian.
Yes, good evening, and thanks for taking my call, George.
Welcome.
Unfortunately, I am calling from Canada now. I've been back here for 6 years after 35 years in Brittany, France. And I'm not a Russian stooge, but back in 1962, I wrote a letter to Khrushchev after this American girl wrote to Khrushchev to get these Russian dolls, which he got. So I thought, well, I wanted a picture of a woolly mammoth from the zoo, not the zoo, from the museum in Russia. But all it happens, my letter got as far as the Communist Party of Canada in Ottawa, and my parents said, "No, you're too young to join the party," and so I gave up on that. But anyways,
well,
quick question
from what I've seen
George.
of them recently, and you had a narrow escape.
All I wanted was a picture of the woolly mammoth. I still haven't got it, but anyways. My quick question for you, George, is this one here regarding what the idiots, imbeciles, they've never been in American history, as far as I know, in power in Washington, and them greenlighting planes that are either Ukrainian or not, taking off from
well, they wouldn't be.
NATO
They wouldn't
airbase.
be. Yeah, they wouldn't be Ukrainian. They'd be Romanian. They'd be other NATO members' planes, which of course means that NATO is then in the war, and those planes could be shot from the sky. They could be brought down by Russia's world-beating anti-aircraft batteries, and their pilots killed, their weaponry destroyed, and so on. It's a nightmarish escalation, Ian.
But my question then, my real question to you then, George, is this one here. As idiotic as these people are in Washington, they must realize that Russia is going to react, and this is going to be potentially a nuclear war. Do you think they thought that through? That's my question.
Well, they would hope that it wouldn't become a nuclear war. But of course, if the conventional war became spectacularly big enough, then nuclear weapons would be very likely to be used. They may hope that Russia would not be able to defeat them in a conventional war. It may be a game of chicken like we had over the Cuban Missile crisis.
Yes. I recall that.
But then we had two wiser leaders in charge.
I was thinking that myself, between Kennedy and Khrushchev back in those days.
Yeah, Kennedy and Khrushchev actually made a good deal.
Well, they did.
They made a good deal. They took the nuclear weapons out of Cuba, and secretly, albeit, the American nuclear weapons were withdrawn from Turkey. So it may be that, but I wouldn't want to bet on it, would you, Ian?
No, I would not.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope you eventually get that picture of the woolly mammoth. I've got my little meerkats here for reasons which will possibly only be understood by viewers in the United Kingdom. Sergei and Alexander and their little children have been banished from the British screen. So I've adopted them. 7,100 votes, easily a new record. NATO is using the Ukrainian people for its own ends, so overwhelmingly say our viewers. Carmel is in St. Helens. Let's hear from her. Carmel, welcome.
Hello, George.
Nice to hear your voice. Go ahead.
I have to say, I used to speak to you about 15 years ago when you were on Talk Radio.
I love Talk Sport. Those were the days.
Yeah. And Carl from Plaistow, I
God
remember
rest
him.
his soul. I spoke at his funeral, Carmel.
Pardon?
I spoke at his funeral. God rest him. He's no longer with us.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, I used to love Carl. He would have enjoyed all this, wouldn't he, if he was alive?
He'd have been the first caller off the rank,
He
yes.
certainly would, yes. Well, the reason I'm ringing you, George, is, you know, there used to be a saying that people who shout the loudest have the most to hide.
Yeah.
Well, all these people shouting and screaming at Russia and what Putin is doing and all this, what are they afraid of? Are they afraid that Putin might find something in Ukraine that they don't want to get out?
They may have done so this very afternoon, Carmel.
Yes. Well, I knew that they had biological laboratories in Ukraine. I think they had about 12 of them, I believe.
But this one was frighteningly close to the Russian border, and it seems to indicate that they were manufacturing and stockpiling the plague.
Yeah.
How about that?
And this is why they're all screaming and shouting for Putin's head, because they know he's going to find out all their dirty little secrets that they've been getting up to in Ukraine.
But you see how easily, with that last call, Paula in High Wycombe, easily
she needs a stiff drink.
How easily people are fooled,
manipulated,
and how they don't even want to take in the counterfacts. That you are giving them. They don't. It's as if they've put a shield up. They don't want to hear facts which inconvenience their narrative.
Exactly, George. Do you know what I put this down? I put this down to the mainstream media. The mainstream media do a brilliant job at brainwashing people and telling them lies.
Yeah, the American and British media especially. And they're the two medias that are most often to be found telling us how free they are. It's quite an achievement to enslave to your media power entire countries of educated people and have them believe that they are free.
Yes, they learned well from Goebbels, didn't they?
Well, they make him blush, I must say.
They certainly do, but they learned very quickly how to manipulate the masses. It was the same over the COVID. Did the same with that.
Actually, if you drew a Venn diagram, there's a considerable overlap between the FBPE soft shoe shufflers from the Waitrose Brigade, the maniacs screaming at people in the street for not wearing a mask, the people that are lighting up their lives and giving away their wages to Ukraine that would never dream of giving to the Palestinians in Gaza or the poor people in Yemen. There's actually tremendous overlap between these three groups. Have you noticed that, Carmel?
I have noticed. I certainly have, George. Certainly have.
But that's because you're a smart woman.
Disgrace.
You're a smart woman. Thanks. Don't be a stranger. Call me back, please, soon. Right, on to my next question. In 1971, in this week, Muhammad Ali's undefeated boxing reign came to an end when Joe Frazier beat him. How many fights had Ali won at that time? A, 31, 2, 17, C, 21. Answer after the break.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway.
By the time that Joe Frazier beat Muhammad Ali in 1971, in this week, Ali had won 31 fights. Now, you saw the Killing Kelly film, The Strange Death of the British weapons scientist David Kelly. I've made a film about it called Killing Kelly. It's sold out, I'm afraid, in Liverpool with over a month to go. It was sold out. But you can still get tickets for the Oxford Town Hall meeting. There's the details. Oxford Town Hall in April. So you can still get your tickets for that. Please go to the site and get them. Patricia in Glasgow says, my Glaswegian husband, this is Patricia in California, I beg your pardon. Patricia in California says, my Glaswegian husband reminded me that Putin asked Clinton for Russia to join NATO. He did indeed. Clinton turned him down. What if we invited them now? People might say that's absurd. It would render NATO superfluous. But doesn't that reaction amplify Putin's point? Very clever, Patricia. So clever you married a Glaswegian. Well done. In California, Elwood says, Putin, a man born in a rat-infested flat, beat NATO. The combined intelligence of the West was weak. If you want peace, prepare for war. Blair weakened our military. He is to blame. And Dave says, George, this Stepford wife mentality adopted by our European leaders towards the US is leading us to the gates of hell. It is incredibly frightening. Very well said, my friend. Let's hear from Akil in Cardiff in Wales. Go ahead, Akil.
Oh, hello. Good evening, George. This is Akil Kata. Can I pronounce it in Arabic for our Arabic-speaking listeners?
Of course, brother.
Akil Kata. I'm originally from Mosul, Iraq. We have met, actually, George, just after the first Gulf War 1990s in Bristol. And you were amazing, and you are always amazing to be the alternative voice.
Shukran,
and this is what I, and this is what I have shared this talk to say the alternative free voice. I would say, George, I've been in Britain for 40 years, and one of the reasons, obviously, we are here is because of what happened in our countries, the destruction by the wars, unfortunately, that was imposed on us. Now, I am, as a person, totally against wars in general. But personally, I think Russia was left with no option but to take action. Although it's very hard to accept it. But I believe that if and only if Russia didn't take action, Russia would have been, in a few years' time, probably in deep, deep trouble. That's one point. Now, the other point is I believe that NATO, led by US and UK, has actually encouraged Ukraine to take stand against Russia for it joining the NATO, which it wasn't actually. It's not in favor of Ukraine as a nation. Maybe the leadership, which we know where is it coming from and its background. The other thing is, as an Iraqi dissident in the UK, I totally feel for the Russians what they're going through now, because in the 1990s, I was actually a taxi driver, and I was in the university as well. And you can imagine every time somebody gets in the taxi and says to me, "Where are you from?" I mean, obviously, I couldn't deny to say I'm not. I mean, I couldn't say I'm from Sweden, or can I? So we were getting. I don't have the blue eyes, well, in some ways, but I mean, we were getting the same comments that some Russians they get in. I think it is outrageous that a normal citizen is been living in the UK and in Europe, getting the same this treatment that we have gone through.
It's shameful, Akhil, and I must say, a bit surprising and more than a bit disappointing. The wave of hatred of Russia. Britain has hated Russia as a state for a very long time, of course. 166 years ago, we fought the Crimean War against them. In 1920, we invaded Russia with 100,000 British troops to try and overthrow the government of Lenin and the Bolsheviks. We were the sharpest of all the Cold War adversaries, although the king gave a sword to Stalin for the contribution of the Red Army in the Second World War, and Churchill frequently praised the Red Army during the war. As soon as the war was over, in fact, before it was over, they were already planning a confrontation with Russia. Last word to you, Akhil.
Thank you. Just one point to make, so I leave a space for others too. One thing shocked me, actually, that Israeli Prime Minister is mediating between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, it should give the freedom to its own, well, not its own, but the Palestinians. They shouldn't be killing children and then coming to try to show that it's representing peace. I mean, this is, again...
That's a widely held view, Akhil, in the social media that's flowing in here this evening. Thanks for that call, my friend. Jason is in Las Vegas. Go ahead, Jason.
Mr. Galloway, how are you, sir?
By the grace of God, good, thank you.
I just want to let you know I was a military contractor in Iraq, and I'm also a student. I used to, at 55 years old, sir, I will follow you in any war. You're an amazing human being.
Thank you, sir.
And most people should line up behind you. And I'm saying this as an African-American male, okay?
Thank you, sir.
That's number one. You're very welcome. Number two, I had the privilege during the war, 2 weeks before going to Iraq, to caddy for Mr. Jeb Bush. And Mr. Jeb Bush played golf with an Israeli arms dealer during the height of the Iraqi war. Figure that one out. That's number one.
I can figure it out all too easily, Jason.
Number two, the American media, as it stands, has thrown everything at this so-called Russian aggression, which is not a Russian aggression at all. They are obnoxiously lying to the American people, like they lied about the Iraqi war, which, sir, I was on the ground.
Yeah, it's often the same liars. It's certainly the same lies.
The propaganda machine and the military-industrial complex is amazingly lying and controlling the American public, and I cannot believe for 1 second why America is not woken up to this. Number two, the neo-Nazis that are in the Ukraine right now, in fighting against Chechens who are Muslims. Look at the optics of that. If these Muslims win, then that goes around the world as Muslims being strong. If these neo-Nazis win, which are embedded in the United States, all over the United States, you saw that in January the 6th. If they win, it's open season on a lot of people, including stupid black people in this country. They don't see these things, okay? Number three, these people in Russia, my girlfriend being Lithuanian, are being, liberated, because there are many Ukrainians that are crossing the border that are happy they're being able to get out of the Ukraine and the corruption. But American media has lied, and they should be put to death. And these people like Obama, that clown, Bush, and this Biden administration, and Clinton, they are putting us at an impasse that may see nuclear war, sir.
Exactly, Jason. Very exceedingly powerful call. We don't want anyone put to death. There's enough death going around. I'll definitely look you up when I'm next in Las Vegas. Thanks for the call. Last call before the news is Trevor in Cambridgeshire. Go ahead, Trevor.
Hi, George. Can I firstly say that just a few years ago I didn't like you very much because of the media nonsense that I was being shown about yourself.
Thank you, sir. You've changed your mind, I hope.
I think you're an absolute warrior for the truth, and I will endeavour to pass your information around as many people as I can.
Thanks.
So the main point is, yes, I joined the army as a junior soldier, and I was brutalised and bullied, and it was fear that drove me, and indoctrination, and I hated certain people. For me, it was the Irish. I absolutely hated and detested, and I was fearful of, and it was a complete and utter indoctrination. What we've gone through for the last 2 years with the disease hysteria. And now we've just moved completely straight onto the next subject of the next boogeyman.
Disease? What disease? It's gone. It's completely gone. All the masks are gone. The virus is dead. On to the next one. The same levels of hysteria.
Yep, you're absolutely right, George. It's to be honest, my whole life, I was just saying to somebody earlier today, my whole life, I've been scared of somebody via the television. It's been the Russians. And if it wasn't the Russians, it was the IRA.
It is amazing how successful that it is. It is repeated in conflict after conflict after conflict, all the way back. I've studied the Sudan campaign, the battles of the Omdurman and so on. The Mahdi, the leader of the Sudanese forces, though he was a military genius, was routinely considered mad here. And it's been one madman after another, that if only we could assassinate them, as Paula and High Wycombe wanted to do, then all our problems would be solved. And then another one comes up, and he's mad also, and war and assassination and so on fills the air. Last word to you, Trev.
Yeah, I'm just saying, as Hillary Clinton said, if I'm going to use the last word, I'm going to use it for something which I wrote down, and because I've been diagnosed with complex PTSD from my time in service, I'm going to just say this one thing: we're going to have a world of PTSD when people wake up to the fact that they have been mentally beaten into acceptance of the things contrary to their own beliefs and inherent common sense. It's indoctrination, George. I thank you very much for what you're doing.
God bless you. God bless you and keep you. It's absolutely true what you've said. There's people getting PTSD watching the bloody television news. That's the truth of it. Coming up in the next hour, Lee Camp is on the show live from the United States. He's been banned, Lee Camp. He's a comedian. He's been taken off Spotify. He's a funny and excellent guy. There's a poll also. Did Tony Blair's half apology to the Archbishop of Canterbury convince you? After the news with Elliot King.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and French President Emmanuel Macron spoke by phone today in a call that lasted 1 hour and 45 minutes, the French presidency says. Both leaders have spoken by phone on Thursday in talks that left Macron with the impression that Putin's goal was to take the whole of Ukraine, according to a French official. The Kremlin has said that Vladimir Putin told his French counterpart Macron that Ukraine was responsible for the provocation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Macron is one of several world leaders who have talked to Putin in recent days, hoping to broker a ceasefire in Ukraine. Earlier today, Putin spoke with Turkish President Recep Erdogan, who appealed for an urgent cessation of hostilities. According to a Kremlin readout of the call, Putin told Erdogan that Ukraine's negotiators should take a more constructive approach at talks, fully taking into account the emerging realities. It was underlined that the suspension of the special operation is only possible if Ukraine stops military operations and carries out well-known Russian demands, says the Kremlin. A second attempt to evacuate civilians from the Ukraine city of Mariupol has failed, and both sides once again blaming each other for breaking the ceasefire. The shelling of the southeastern city has continued today, which has prevented the planned evacuation of civilians for a second time this weekend. It is extremely dangerous to take people out under such conditions, the city council said in an online statement. Visa and MasterCard have announced they will suspend all operations in Russia in protest at its invasion of the Ukraine. Cards issued by Russian banks will no longer be supported by the networks, the payment giants said on Saturday. Both firms have also said that cards issued abroad will no longer work at businesses or ATMs in Russia. But Russia's major banks, including state-backed Sberbank, have already downplayed the impact the move will have on their clients. Shell, however, has defended its decision to purchase Russian crude oil despite the war in Ukraine. The oil giant said in a statement that the decision to purchase the fuel at a discount price was difficult. It confirmed that it had brought a cargo of Russian crude oil on Friday, but it had no alternative. Russian oil currently makes up about 8% of world supply, but around 40% of the EU's. One of Shell's refineries, which produces diesel and petrol and other products, is also among the biggest in Europe. A Shell spokesperson said, "To be clear, without any uninterrupted supply of crude oil to refineries, the energy industry cannot assure continued provisions of essential products to people across Europe over the weeks ahead." Britons should not head to Ukraine to fight and should instead help however they can from the UK, the head of the armed forces has said. Speaking to the BBC, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin rejected Ukraine's calls for a no-fly zone, saying it would not help tactically and might escalate fighting. On Britons wanting to join the fight, Radakin said that the sound of gunfire was not something you want to rush to, and urged people to support Ukraine in sensible ways from the UK. Asked whether Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had been right to say that she would support any Briton who wanted to fight, he said, "We can all understand the sentiment, and that sentiment needs to be channeled into support for Ukraine." The Foreign Enlistment Act of 1870 makes it an offence for a UK citizen to fight for a foreign power at war with the state the UK is at peace with. As the UK is not at war with Russia, this would make it illegal to join the Ukrainian International Brigade. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called for a senior parliamentary committee to investigate claims Boris Johnson pushed for a Russian-born businessman to get a peerage despite security concerns. It has been reported that the security services withdrew an assessment that given newspaper proprietor Evgeny Lebedev an honour posed a security risk at the Johnsons intervened. It has been reported that the security services withdrew an assessment that giving newspaper proprietor Evgeny Lebedev an honour posed a security risk after the Johnsons intervened. Starmer said he was very concerned about the case. However, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab insisted there was no impropriety. 6 people, including 2 children, have been killed by a tornado that has struck a state in the United States. The tornado ripped through Madison County, which is southwest of the state capital Des Moines, in Iowa. The heavy storms caused more than 10,500 people in Des Moines to lose power. The National Service added the tornado was an EF3, meaning that it swirled with winds of up to 206 miles per hour. Madison County Emergency Managing Director Dejeuner Ayala later confirmed that 4 children and 2 adults had been killed when the twister hit around 4:30 p.m. local time. The family of the cricketer Shane Warne has accepted the offer of a state funeral, according to Victoria's Premier Dan Andrews. Legendary Australian spinner Warne died of a suspected heart attack in Thailand on Friday, aged 52. Flowers, beer and photographs have been left at Warne's statue at the Melbourne Cricket Ground as fans pay tribute. It will be an opportunity for Victorians to pay tribute to his contribution to his sport, to our state and our country, Andrews said. State funerals are held to honour people of national significance. Warne took 708 wickets, the second most of all time, in 145 tests across a stellar 15-year international career that ended in 2007, and has recently been quoted as the greatest cricketer of all time. And finally, British cat owners are calling for manufacturer Purina to remove its brand of cat food, Felix As Good As It Looks, from shelves, claiming its new recipe has caused their pets to feel unwell. Facebook group Cats Recently Affected by Felix Food has more than 28,000 members from across the UK who claim their cats began vomiting, experiencing kidney problems and feeling lethargic after consuming the popular cat food. The recipe was changed in March 2021, and shortly afterwards pet owners began reporting a change in their cat's behaviour and health. Last year, the group launched a petition calling for the product to be recalled, which received more than 11,000 signatures.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Okay, the first poll has closed. 8,147 people voted in it, a new record. In fact, 20% more than the previous record. Is NATO using the Ukrainian people for its own ends? On Twitter, it was yes 73%, no 27%. On YouTube, it was yes 90%, no 10%. And on Telegram, it was yes 96%, no 4%. So overwhelmingly, people believe that NATO is using the Ukrainian people for their own ends. Here's the second poll. Did Tony Blair's half apology convince you? If it did, I've got a bridge here I could sell you. A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram channel. Now, one of the very finest Americans is Lee Camp. Lee is a comedian with an edge. He was the host of the hit, and it really deserves that term, the hit political comedy show, Redacted Tonight. I've been on it myself more than once, I think. I loved the show. It had a huge audience. It's just been banned. Although he himself is not Russian, is as American as can be. He's merely an anti-war man with eloquence and humor. So, of course, he must be banned. Lee Camp, welcome to the show. Lee, I'm extremely sorry about what's happened. I know it's not the end for you, and we'll discuss where people can still watch you, but how did all this happen, and how did you feel when you got the news?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of shocking how quick it's been, how quickly it happened. In the span of 3 days, I lost my TV show. The videos on YouTube of Redacted Tonight are banned across the EU and Europe. And my personal podcast, Moment of Clarity, was deleted from Spotify. And, of course, it wasn't just my show. RT America shut down in the span of a few hours. and it was shocking. I think that it had to be either sanctions that made it impossible to operate, or the U.S. Justice Department telling them to stop, or something very sudden. You know, it was not just we're getting some backlash kind of shutdown. It was something very sudden, and it's sad to see this level of censorship. You know, the Americans pride themselves on this freedom of speech, freedom of press, and it has become clear over the past few days just how aggressively that is not true.
Well, you've led me, segued perfectly into what was my next question. You're supposed to be the land of the free. You're one of the only countries in the world where the First Amendment guarantees your right to free speech. What about all that?
Yeah, well, you know, you got to look into the fine print. The devil's in the details. We are the land of the free, and we also have the most prisoners in the world. We are the land of a prison state. So you can see how false that is. And if it's not just RT America, it is anti-war voices, anti-imperialist voices have been suppressed and crushed on most social media platforms. You know, my stuff has been shadow banned on Facebook for years now. And to me, it shows how much the U.S. corporate government, which they are basically owned by corporations, how much they can't handle any kind of truth that are outside a very tiny Overton window, a very tiny window of allowable thought, which is on your mainstream media.
Well, you've always been a candle in the dark, and now it's been snuffed out on the big platforms. But this is 2022. It's not 1952. It's not even 2002. People can still watch you to get your take on events and actually get a terrifically good laugh while doing it.
Yes, patreon.com/Lee Camp I've created. I'm still on YouTube. I still have LeeCamp.com.
You're on YouTube, but only in the U.S.
Well, yeah, that's true. Redacted Tonight is banned in other countries.
So redacted is redacted.
Exactly. I mean, what a way for a show to go out after 8 years is to actually have Redacted Tonight be redacted. I guess there's no way I'd prefer for it to happen, but it is sad to see it go. You know, I poured my heart and soul into that show. I had immense freedom. I wrote every word I ever said myself. I never was told what to say or how to say it or anything, and I doubt I'll ever see that from another network program again.
Never.
But like you said, I'm still out there on Patreon and on Twitter, so I will continue.
You'll have to go on the boards, although the way things are going, and we saw it in Canada recently, that if you protest or take a view that the state doesn't like, you could end up actually getting your bank account frozen. You could end up getting your pets taken in Canada. How long before they start to say you can't book a theatre?
Yeah, it's coming. I mean, I had said about you're referring to the trucker protest in Canada. You don't have to agree with what the truckers stand for, what they're saying. What happened is very dangerous. To just freeze the bank accounts of any kind of activist, nonviolent activist that's protesting something. What is to stop them from doing that against environmentalists, against pipeline protesters? It is just one step. And it will be happening. So I think people should be terrified with the way things are going. And cross-platform censorship, like I've seen in the past week, means there is a conspiracy afoot. They are conspiring. Like organization, I mean, companies have to get together and decide simultaneously that they're silencing these voices. It's very dangerous.
And what's been the reaction from other comedians, other people in show? I mean, Joe Rogan, that Spotify tried to, they tried to defend him. They resisted the siren calls from 1960s hippies to drive him off the air. In the end, Spotify backed down with him. Have you had any support from your peers?
I mean, there are some great examples of people that have supported me, like Abby Martin and Ben Norton and so many great journalists out there. But in terms of just regular comedians that are incredibly well known? No, not at all. I don't hear from them. I haven't heard from them in several years because apparently, when you're anti-imperialist and anti-corporate America, you're a leper. And I have not gotten much support from those big name comics. Joe Rogan has been supportive in the past. I don't even know that he's avoiding supporting me. But most of them have no interest in touching something like this.
Well, of course, Francis Bacon said that self-censorship was the arrow that flies in the night. People will self-censor themselves from supporting you in case they're next.
Yeah, I think that is a big factor at play here is they don't want to risk their political capital, their online clout, as it were, to stand up for someone who has, turned into a pariah of the state. And again, it's not just me. This is anybody who is at RT America. This is anybody who is strongly anti-war in this time where you're supposed to just, fall for the jingoist wave and just start frothing at the mouth to send more weapons. You really are, you're anathema to the public discourse when you're speaking out against war.
This recalls to me a great movie I saw called Trumbo, which talked of the McCarthyite period where people like you actually had to move to Europe. And when they stayed in the United States, they had to adopt false names. The script of Spartacus itself was written by a man who couldn't reveal himself because he'd been blacklisted and banned in the wave of McCarthyism in the 1950s. Is that what we're approaching now?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities. There really are. Having to, Trumbo had to be behind the scenes. And this didn't have to do with McCarthyism, but it had to do with the state chasing him. Was Lenny Bruce, famous comedian, was speaking out against the state, speaking out against religion, things that were not generally accepted on stage. And he was basically driven to his death by the FBI. I mean, they hounded him and arrested him at every chance they got, and he couldn't make a living. And then he ultimately OD'd. And we saw his life, or people saw his life crumble because of the attacks of the state. So just because you're a performer or an entertainer or a writer does not make you free of this level of harassment, this extensive harassment, if you aren't agreeing with the U.S. war machine.
An even greater man, Paul Robeson, of course, was effectively pushed out of public life, a man who had been a giant on Broadway and on the West End stage, who had been in Showboat, the screen superstar, a man who was the first black player to play professional football for Rutgers and so on. There's a long history of this kind of witch hunting.
Oh yeah, so many brilliant people have been in prison. Eugene Debs and Abby Hoffman was a great and hilarious political activist who was also kind of driven into hiding because of COINTELPRO, and his life was basically destroyed. It happens again and again. History seems cyclical, and if you look back, this is not new. When the U.S. needs rallying for war or rallying for their propaganda talking points, they will do everything they can to shut down the voices that speak out against it.
And all of this happening under the Democrats.
Yeah. Well, there's the two corporate parties are the two sides of the same coin, and so it doesn't really matter whether it was under Trump, under Biden. Under Trump was when a lot of these harassment and a lot of these sanctions against RT America and the like started, and now we're seeing the continuation under Biden. So. Again, people like to think that these are two different worlds. You get a Republican or a Democrat in office, but they agree on 80 to 90% of the structural issues of the country. They're owned by the same companies, and there really is very little difference between those two parties.
So there we have it. If you're in the United States, follow Lee Camp on YouTube. If you're not in the United States, go to Patreon/Lee Camp. My dear, wear it as a badge of honor. Consider yourselves officially redacted. Thanks for coming on the show, Lee Camp.
Thank you, George.
Now, sorry, let me, and don't forget, I'm on Patreon also. I nearly forgot that. There's new content going on there every week. Become a supporter now. You can search for me on the app or go to patreon.com/George Galloway in your web browser. I'll shortly be starting with my young friend Simon and with others inside the football business, a football podcast, George's Best Football Podcast. That'll be going on the Patreon page. My Desert Island Discs, although we'll not be able to call it that, will be going out on Patreon. My speeches from 20 years ago in the great campaign around the country to stop the war on Iraq, little mini documentaries like the Robert Maxwell one, lots and lots of content. So please follow me on Patreon. That's patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, Ian says, you mentioned that the US has recently been talking to Venezuela, this weekend actually, trying to repair relationships in order to secure oil and gas supplies. I don't doubt that part. But do you think it could also be to avert Russia and China placing their missiles there? I don't know, Ian, but I'll tell you one thing for sure. Juan Guaido, the president of Venezuela, is no more. And the chumps on the bench at the Old Bailey that handed Juan Guaido, the pretender, the great pretender, $1 billion worth of Venezuela's stolen sovereign wealth is no more. He might get the gig in the Ukraine as a compensation, but he ain't anymore the president of Venezuela because the American government is currently, this weekend, talking to the actual government of Venezuela. Just think about that. Now, let me go to Hong Kong. How can I not? Chris is in Hong Kong. Go ahead, Chris. Welcome.
Yeah, how are you this evening, George? Great to be on the show again.
Great line. Thanks for calling.
Yeah. Strange talking about Venezuela at the moment, and Russia, actually. It's rather difficult to produce diesel without Venezuelan or Russian oil.
Venezuela has the world's largest resources, and Russia the second largest.
Yeah, but when Shell has purchased its load of Russian oil, that has to be mixed with other oils so that we can get diesel, so that we can deliver goods. A lot of people don't know that, so that's another good shot in the foot by the EU and our NATO partners, shall I say. Look, talking about things down here, specifically in Asia and with regards to China, obviously I'm in the People's Republic of China, events in Ukraine have been covered low-key in official media outlets, the Chinese media outlets. There hasn't been too much bellicose media coverage, even in Japan, in Nikkei Time, by the way, Singapore Straits Times, it's been more circumspect. Obviously, India isn't on board. Pakistan certainly isn't on board. Bangladesh is not on board. So we've got this rather massive 3 billion person bloc.
Yeah, they forget about it. They don't count, you see.
No, well, we've all got...
Do you remember?
Hey,
Chris, do you remember?
Allegedly, we all have brown skin.
Let me... one of the wittiest things I ever heard Tony Benn say was, I've just realized that I know half of the international community. George Bush and Tony Blair are the international community, and I know Tony Blair. Therefore, I know half of the international community. They pretend that they're speaking for everyone in their own countries, and they absolutely wipe the gigantic populations that are not on the same side as them.
Okay, well, whilst NATO, the European Union, and America wants to get on with whatever they wish to get on with, we have a significant Far Eastern economic bloc. That's been in gestation for a long time. Russia cemented itself into that, ingratiated itself, perhaps might be a better word, in December when you had the Putin President Xi big meeting, massive, and then you had the February 4th Putin Xi meeting just before the Beijing Winter Olympics. There was a 5,000-word document issued from that reinforcing what had been stated in December, which was a new strategic relationship, business relationship, and be in no doubt the Russian, the Chinese Foreign Ministry had full knowledge of Putin's intent.
I'm sure they're acting
I believe
in
that
synchronicity.
the reality is they were asked to hold on, and in holding on, you also had the Munich security meeting in Germany that Zelensky attended, and then lamenting the fact that they had no nuclear weapons and that they would like to ascertain nuclear weapons again. And what happens today, highlighted on your show, I actually just missed it about 3 days ago when I read about these laboratories in the Ukraine. If it's a fact they were manufacturing weapons of mass destruction.
Changes
and by
everything.
That, I mean the neo-fascists. Oh, yeah, my God.
Changes everything. The plague.
No, it certainly does.
Cholera. Unbelievable.
Certainly does.
Thanks,
But
Chris.
of course,
great call in Hong Kong. Tony is in Goole. Go ahead, Tony.
Evening, George.
Evening, sir.
George, I always think, even though we'll probably agree to disagree, there has to be a level of consistency. For many years, I've listened to other radio stations, and you've been absolutely fantastic and fair, where you've stood up for Britain about the occupancy of the Nazis in the 30s and the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
I'll keep this quick. I agree with you completely about the disgusting behaviour of the West, where we bombed Iraq, which was an invasion on lies. And the truth is just unforgivable what's happened there. And while I also agree to a certain extent what's been happening in Ukraine for the last 8 years, and we don't have to look back at the tragic events of the Flight F-17, that most people that know a bit about politics will know that there's been conflict for 8 years. If we're going to go down the path of consistency, this is simply, in the long run, a war that Russia can't win, because you've only got to study history. You've got to look at Afghanistan with the British, then the Russians and the Americans. Countries will fight to the death for their nationality. And
if you mean actually militarily, Russia will completely control Ukraine.
I didn't mean that. I meant morally.
Yeah, morally, yeah. I mean, that's a different matter.
George.
But you said they'll fight to the death. They won't. The rich have already fled from Ukraine, and the regime in Kiev will not be long in fleeing after them. That will not be the end of the story. You're right. You're right. That will not be the end of the story. And Russia may well find that while it does not want to occupy Ukraine, it may well in the end have to. But sometimes there are wars that have to be fought, Tony. The Second World War had to be fought. We had no choice and should have confronted Hitlerism earlier than we did. And we could have done so in 1936, could have done so over Spain, we could have done so over Abyssinia, but the Chamberlain-Hitler pact at Munich and so on merely delayed the inevitable. Sometimes wars have to be fought. And I think from Russia's perspective, if you were Russian, you would see stopping Ukraine, joining NATO, and American nuclear weapons being moved up to Russia's border, 5 minutes flying time. You would agree with that, Tony?
George, can I just finish on this?
Yeah, last word to you.
I do. Yeah, I'll make this quick. I do understand. I spoke to my good lady a few weeks ago about this, and I do see both points of view. And we would be the same as Russia if it was the way around. But my heart goes out, just like it's been going out for 4 years. I've rung you about the bombings in Syria with the Russians, the British disgusting selling the Typhoon jets in Yemen. We're all dirty. Honestly, if you look at it through history, with weapons, we're all dirty. And I just feel for people around the world with all these conflicts. And the last point I'd say in it, I'm actually going to say something controversial here.
Oh, another one. Go on.
Go on. I think the UK president is actually now being reckless because he's fighting a war where the people are losing the battle. And I would think now the best thing he could do was swallow his pride a bit and try and broker a deal, because he's putting his women and children in the firing line, and I just feel for him.
Good call, Tony. Very good call. I've got to do one last break. Going back a bit, on this day in 1836, the Alamo was overrun by up to 3,000 Mexican soldiers, and 200 Texans in the fort were killed. What was the name of the famous one after whom a knife was named? Joseph Blade, Jim Bowie, Des Swiss. Answer right after this.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland, even the European, which he then owned, all over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
And the answer was, of course, Jim Bowie, the Bowie knife, although Des Swiss was an imaginative option offered there. Now, news on the podcast, as I mentioned on Moats Extra on Thursday, we have new subscribers in Zambia, Rwanda, Malawi, the Åland Islands near Finland, Belize, Somalia, Tanzania, Yemen, Gibraltar, Bulgaria, Denmark, and Czechia. But since, is that Chechnya or the Czech Republic? Do check. Czech Republic. See, I can't keep up to date with all these new names. But since then, we've had North Macedonia, Jamaica, and Uganda subscribe to us. This means we now have subscribers in 144 countries. Actually, can't be many countries left in the world that have got electricity that we are not yet in. We've been in the political top 20 in the UK, Spain, Russia, Cyprus, Qatar, Poland, Portugal, Nigeria, Egypt, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Argentina, Singapore, Sweden, South Africa, and New Zealand. And we are number 1 in Ghana, Oman, Namibia, Ecuador, Slovenia, Zimbabwe, and Malaysia. You'd be a fool not to download us. Remember to subscribe to this behemoth and give us a 5-star review, like Sailor Matt in Australia, who says, the only show with decent analysis, especially now that Silicon Valley censorship has kicked in here in Australia. 5 stars. Thank you, Matt, for that. Let's get through the calls. Nadia in Harrow in London. Go ahead, Nadia.
Hi, George. I told you we should be moving to Jamaica.
Ah, yes. Well, now we can download the podcast there. Jamaica, there's a great song. Isn't there a Barry Manilow song about Jamaica? Maybe I'm getting mixed up. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, I mean, the ridiculousness of everything that's going on, what I'm hearing, just a one-sided point of view. And people should be worried when that happens.
But you see from tonight's audience and last week's audience and Thursday's audience, Nadia, there's an enormous appetite amongst people for a different point of view, even if they don't agree with it.
Because it's being censored from them, and everyone's asking questions now.
Exactly.
What the hell is going on?
Exactly.
And, you know, the racism, all of a sudden, ban everything Russian, and the hype, it's too much, and people smell a rat since the Iraq War. I'm sorry. That's it.
I agree entirely.
Yeah.
They stopped believing, a large segment of our population stopped believing the state after the Iraq War.
I mean, look at the joke in Afghanistan when the whole Taliban moved in straight after the troops left. I mean, come on. I mean, for me, you know, when I hear about the sanctions and about all of this malarkey going on, all this, you know, Russian-phobic things that are happening, for me, what that's doing, it's just joining Russia together under Mother Russia. That's why they call it Mother Russia.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is, for me, you don't know what you're doing in that regard. When I think about the British government and the MI6, I'm like, I don't know what they're doing.
It's hard to see that it can succeed. The Russian-China strategic partnership holds all the aces, as our people will quickly discover when the gas price becomes
it's already hyping up.
Yeah,
it's already going up.
Unsustainable, and the petrol price and the price of commodities, which feeds into everything that is manufactured. It will become unsustainable. The banking crisis, which must be just round the corner. So we're in very, very difficult times, Nadia. Last word to you.
But just a quick thing. You see, the thing with that, when you cut ties with Russia and the trade with Russia, you're opening yourself to trade with the Americans. So the Americans benefit from this kind of trade. So I think that's kind of the strategic point from the Americans.
Well, it's definitely true in shale oil, and they are going to try and supply some of the dramatic shortfall that's going to now exist in the European Union in particular.
That's it.
But they will do so at a very high price, and they can only do so very, very partially. Nadia, thanks. Lovely call. Gregory is in Luton. Go ahead, Gregory.
Hi there, George. Thanks for taking the call, mate.
Welcome.
You've been educating me for many, many years, my friend, and hope you're around for a long, long time to do it all.
God willing. Thank you.
George, I just want to take up the issue about the Israeli delegation going to Moscow.
Yeah, it was the Prime Minister, I think.
Yeah. Well, to quote, you know, morally obligated to negotiate a diplomatic solution to this. But, you know, Israel, I would say, don't do anything for altruistic reasons. You know, there's always an agenda there, and the agenda being, on this occasion, the extrication from Ukraine of 100,000 Ukrainian Jews, right?
Well, most Ukrainian Jews, of course, were murdered, and most of those who escaped the mass murder moved to Israel, where they now occupy somebody else's country. And some of them there from an occupied land are protesting about the occupation of Ukraine. You really couldn't make that up. I don't know what the Israeli Prime Minister was up to. I'm told that Russia did not appreciate it, that he wasn't invited to mediate. And I was actually in Moscow once when Netanyahu actually turned up uninvited and marched right to the front of the demonstration, the Victory Day demonstration, and stood next to Vladimir Putin and walked with him on the march when Putin knew nothing about it. So, of course, they weren't acting for altruistic reasons, but then no state acts for entirely altruistic reasons. No, which you can't, you really can't rule out, Gregory. Thanks for the call, mate. Mark is in Cork, in Ireland. Go ahead, Mark. We've lost Mark. Let me do some more social media. Aziz says the Warsaw Pact was dissolved in 1991. Why didn't NATO also dissolve? Dia Khalidia says every warned spirit knew that NATO was playing with Ukrainians' lives to see what Russia is capable of. Here we are now, so neither EU nor USA can stop Russia. Paul S. says NATO is just the muscle taking its orders from Wall Street. Gary D. says weapons manufacturers are using them. NATO is just a slave. Big business is in control of the West. The system is broken. And Richard in Wales says, I would say to this, as I did when I heard it on the radio, I think that Vladimir would be happy to give his defense on trial in The Hague, but please not before the mile-long queue of other defendant candidates take their place in chronological order. And Tom says, to quote the ghoul Blair's education, 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 the irony is that Moats does exactly that, but not, I suspect, in the way he intended. Thanks, Tom. And Andy says, hi, George, do you find it ironic that Sturgeon and the Scottish separatists support Ukraine, who are fighting against separatists? More than ironic, my dear. Let's go to Uxbridge. Jamal is in Uxbridge, outside London. Go ahead, Jamal.
Hi there, Jamal. Hi there, George. Great fan of yours.
Thank you, sir.
By the way, you're one of the few sources of truth on the media.
Yeah, there's not many of us left.
Not many. Lying BBC are just not worth watching. But
oh, God,
anyway,
no. It makes me physically sick, the BBC News. I cannot bear 5 seconds of it.
What the BBC do, they establish a false narrative and then get everybody to discuss around that narrative.
Even on Match of the Day, I had to switch off Match of the Day last night for the first time in my entire life.
I know you're a football fanatic.
Yeah.
Okay, here's my little 2 cents. Basically, I saw a lecture by somebody called Professor Meisermeyer. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. University of Chicago.
Mearsheimer.
That's the Mearsheimer.
They're now trying to sack him from the University of Chicago for correctly predicting in 2014 what would eventually happen next.
I was just listening to a clairvoyant or a soothsayer.
Yeah.
I was almost physically shaken.
Yeah.
He predicted everything that's going to happen now.
Yeah.
Basically, he said that the West is leading Ukraine up the primrose path, that they're encouraging Ukraine to play hardball with Russia, and when the crunch comes, they will not support Ukraine. And he said, you're heading for the total destruction of the Ukraine.
It's absolutely
which is happening now.
Absolutely tragic. Mearsheimer is a very, very considerable academic indeed. Anyone who dismisses what he has to say, especially without actually watching it, is an absolute fool. And to try and cancel him for being right, well, hey, that's happened to me before, Jamal. Thanks for the call. Let's go to Wembley in London. Neil. Go ahead, Neil.
Hi, George. Brilliant fan of the show.
Thank you, sir.
Finally got a chance to speak on the little situation that's been going on between Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
Well, my thoughts is that the West probably made the biggest mistake cutting them off from SWIFT, only because now Russia will look to decentralize finance.
Absolutely, they will. Necessity is the mother of invention, Neil.
Yeah. And also, another thing is, I'm not too sure how true this is. Well, I don't know if you have any knowledge on it, whether or not Vitalik Buterin, the owner of Ethereum, is a part of the KGB or not.
Who's a part of the KGB?
Vitalik Buterin, the owner of Ethereum.
No, I've never heard of him, mate. I don't know about that. But there's no KGB. The KGB's been dead for decades. It's the FSB now.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Last call. Last word to you, Neil.
Yeah, no. Just one more thing as well is because Russia have been testing our airspace defenses for years. Will a cyber attack be the first point of attack on the West towards us?
No, it's much more likely to take place in the next week or so, and on land.
Oh,
in
okay.
a hot war. I have said since before before Christmas, as this climate worsened and fears escalated, and it's there on YouTube, you can see it. I have said over and over again that I think we're going to be at war in this year of 2022, and nothing's happened that has dissuaded me from that. Thanks, Neil, for the call. Angel is in Bristol. Let's hear from Angel. Go ahead, Angel.
Hello, George. It's really good to be talking to you. I wasn't actually expecting a call back, but I'm really pleased. Basically, I'm Bulgarian. I've lived in Bristol, the UK, for a long time.
Okay.
And this is harkening back to the Russophobia that we're seeing now. It's harkening back to like the Cold War era, which I grew up in.
Yeah.
And experienced living in the UK. And subsequently, the EU membership of Bulgaria. So there's a lot of xenophobia and this kind of thing that we're not quite European, you know, and shouldn't be treated as such. So it's kind
they'll be taking you for a Russian, you know, that in the same way that Sikhs get attacked at times of hatred of Muslims, even though they're not at all Muslims. They'll be attacking Bulgarians and insulting them, at least.
I know. And we have a long history with Russia, and it really upset me the other day. A 3rd of March is a celebration for Bulgaria's independence, or kind of Russia's help with getting rid of the Ottomans in the late 1800s. And it seems that a lot of Bulgarians have now become brainwashed by NATO and EU news, media, and they've banned RT as well, which I found out recently.
Well, the whole of the EU did that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And as I'm quite upset that a lot of Bulgarian people are now kind of siding with the EU against our brothers who are Russians.
I can understand. I can hear it in your voice. I can feel how you're feeling. All I would say is, if you want to cheer yourself up, look at the mega rally in Belgrade that took place this week. That'll cheer you up, my friend. Thanks for the call. Now, earlier we had a call from Paula in High Wycombe. Some of the comments on YouTube suggest that Paula is now trending in the United Kingdom. She's being discussed widely on all platforms. We gave her, of course, plenty of time, as is only correct, because here we believe in freedom of speech, unlike the hypocrites that spent your whole lifetime telling you that they did. Mohammed is in Philadelphia. Let's go to him. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Hey, George, how are you?
By the grace of God, good. Thank you.
Good. Thank God. Well, I got good news for you, first of all. According to the media here, COVID doesn't exist anymore.
No, Putin killed it. Putin killed the COVID bug. Like a miracle, isn't it?
Unfortunately,
it's a miracle.
It is crazy. Unbelievable. And the bad news, the media here in this country is owned by people who work for a different entity than the American people, man. They don't care. They're leading us to war. Everything I see, constantly provoking Ukrainians to fight and giving them weapons and basically spreading this mass propaganda. It doesn't look good. I don't think the American governments care about the American people, unlike some people think. And that's what scares me. I don't think they have the sanity to keep us out of a World War III.
I've never believed they cared anything about the ordinary people of America any more than British governments care about the ordinary people of Britain. Mohammed, thanks for the call. John is in Phoenix, Arizona. Let's hear from him. John, welcome.
Oh, well, thanks, George. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thanks, John. Go ahead, sir.
Awesome. So, George, it's hopeless. There's no way to wake up the cattle. They stole the election, the corona hoax. How do you think that they're going to handle the biolabs in the Ukraine? They're just going to brush it off.
Yeah, sure. But that doesn't exculpate them. It will eventually pursue them and haunt them. And one day, things will change, John. I believe that. I lived through a period less than 20 years ago where I was public enemy number one. They were trying to prosecute me for treason. They were attacking me in the street. They were calling me bad and mad. And now, less than 20 years later, nobody in Britain, and I mean nobody, would turn up to a university debate with me on the subject of the Iraq War. So things change. There will be a period where people will feel actually embarrassed and even ashamed of the way in which they were again fooled. John, last word to you.
Azov, that's really confusing. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
The Azov battalion is a part of Ukraine's National Guard. It is deployed mainly along the border with the two breakaway republics in the Donbass. They are swastika carrying, SS insignia bearing, jack-booted Hitlerites. They are people who believe that black people, gay people, Jewish people, and Russian people are subhumans. And that's our new friends, John.
So I agree with everything you're saying, but it makes zero sense because the founder, and it's on the Wikipedia page as well, is a Ukrainian Jew.
He's not the founder, he's not the founder, but he is the funder. Go figure. Follow Max Blumenthal.
Well, also on the Wikipedia page, there's a whole bunch of Jews that are a part of this.
Yeah, well, why don't you go to another Jew, Max Blumenthal, on the Grey Zone. He's written about it this very day. He explains it all quite brilliantly. John, thanks for that call. Juan is in Tampa, in Florida. Go ahead, Juan.
I think that what the U.S. and the West, the NATO, is doing to Russia is ridiculous. This is what they're doing is criminal, and I think the people that are behind all of this stuff are the big corporations, and they keep the American people very ignorant, very dumb. So
yeah, well, it's not just the Americans. Not just the Americans. There's a lot of clever Americans, as this show proves, but America seems particularly affected by mass ignorance.
Yes, mass ignorance, and that's the fault of the media. And that's the big corporations that control the media, and they're telling the people lies and nothing but lies because I think that since the economy is about to collapse here in the United States, they're eager for a war. They want to somehow recover, and that's never going to happen. That's something they're silly.
Well, the war will be a disaster for them. I am pretty sure about that. Juan, thanks for the call. Heidi is in Stuttgart in Germany. Go ahead, Heidi.
Hello, George. How are you?
Nice to hear from you. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I'm a fan of you. Well, I live in Germany, and the media is very one-sided. It's very anti-Russian. They do not present the real truth. They do not present anything. For example, the situation, the geopolitical game that there is a geopolitical game against Russia, and Putin being threatened by nuclear weapons in Ukraine, by possible the development of Ukraine to nuclear weapons, and the invitation of NATO troops to Ukraine. They just don't talk about it. It's very one-sided media. I really wonder if Germany and other Western countries are really a democracy anymore. It is just one-sided.
I think that is a very important question. It's one that we don't have time fully to explore, but the extent to which our countries can now be called a democracy is very much in question. Here in Britain, we have a one-party parliament, two cheeks of the same ass, all supporting the same policies on all the important things. We have a media which is ludicrously unfree. We have a major crackdown on social media platforms. The only reason that I'm still here is because I'm the leader of a British political party. I have a mass following of more than 1.5 million people on social media. I have an audience of more than 1 million people on this show. If they could get rid of me, they would. Perhaps a car accident might be the only way. Perhaps a walk in the woods that goes wrong. So understand this, Haiti. I never walk in the woods. And as a Roman Catholic, I cannot commit suicide. So if I'm found having committed suicide in a wood, it never happened. Here is the legend, Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I wrote on a piece of paper, the waves of war are flooding in because it's a worry.
It's a very powerful line, very good.
Well, how can we stop it? Because we've got nuclear weapons now, so we haven't got the power if it does get worse and worse. We haven't got any power, have we?
No, we don't.
I mean, I wouldn't contemplate the end of the world scenario, but according to Tony Blair's interview, did you hear it with the Archbishop today?
I couldn't bear, but I read the lowlights.
It was very boring, but he does believe that good will eventually overcome. I mean, if we do have this terrible sort of scenario of this nuclear war, there won't be anybody left, will there?
No, only the cockroaches may survive it. Anyone that's watched The Next Day or watched Threads, as people like you and me of our age had to do back in the 1980s when nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the US looked likely, knows that face masks or hiding under your table or in the cupboard under the stairs is not where it's at. There will be nothing left.
Protest and survive with E.P. Thompson, not protect and survive.
It was a wonderful piece of work. God rest him. I wish he was here now. Well, all we can do is pray, Norma. I advise all those who are religious people to pray that today's events do not go down in history as a turning point from which there was no turning back. But I have my fears. If we're still here, we may be back in midweek if I can put the assets together, but it's not easy. But if we're not in midweek, then we will be back here next Sunday at the same time and the same place. I'd like to say, as I usually do, that it's been marvelous, but not really, because we may be entering the end game. Did Tony Blair's half apology convince you? 6% say yes, 94% say no. I think that we must all now prepare for the worst. I'm George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows.